If you called in, can you please identify yourself?
Nancy Henry, and I'll be making public comment.
Thank you. The new caller that just joined, can you identify yourself? Say it again. Hello? If you just called in, can you please identify yourself?
Go to the.
Hello, Mark Brown.
Mark Brown. Thank you. I got a call.
Craig Evans is here also.
Craig Evans.
Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Hello?
Yeah,
Can
you
hear
there?
me?
Yes, I
This is
can.
Tony, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear. So, Tony, are you on?
I am, but I could not get access to the computer. We're still
Okay.
trying. I'm on my phone.
I don't know how to. His name?
Anybody there?
I am
Yeah.
here. This is Tony. I'm on my phone. I
All
cannot.
right.
I cannot join the. I cannot join the meeting with the computer because it tells me that the browser isn't supported. I have no idea what that means.
Okay, you guys hang on. We're trying to get everybody on here. Hold on.
All right.
So we have somebody that's signed in as anonymous. Can you please verify who you are?
This is Tony Casados.
No, Tony, I have you and Michael. I have somebody signed on with their name as anonymous.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
It's here also.
Okay. And we have a couple of people that we don't know who they are. Caller 4 and anonymous.
We got call number 4. That can you say your name, please? If you called in, can you please state your name?
Excuse me?
If you called in, can you please state your name?
No, my name is Vanessa Alexander. I'm an investigative researcher.
Oh, I got you. You're
Yeah,
good to
I'm
go.
just,
Thank you.
yeah, no problem. I'm just saying, per the Open Meetings Act, if people want to observe without giving their names, that's completely acceptable and appropriate. And of course, it is mindful of retaliation that's been taken. So if they want to call in as anonymous or whatever, that is acceptable per the Open Meetings Act and First Amendment. Just so you guys know. Thank you.
That is correct. That is correct.
I think Milford's the last one we need.
Yeah, Milford's the last one. I think you might have just called in. Milford, did you just call in?
Yes, this is Milford. Yep.
Roger that, boss. I can hear you perfectly.
Okay. Let's see here. am I able to, like a Zoom meeting, see, anything, or I'm just on the phone?
Just stay on the phone. Put us on speaker, and then just stay on the phone. And yeah,
Okay, I have a mute.
there should be a little mic on the bottom. Yeah, it looks like you muted yourself. You're good to go. Thank you, Milford.
Assessors.
Go ahead and call this meeting to order. We'll start off with the roll call. This meeting is going to be hybrid because of the weather conditions. Miss Switzer McGinley. Is she on?
She was on and then she left.
Okay. Move on. Mr. Tafoya. Okay. Mr. Cronin. Yes. Mr. Casados.
Do you want to unmute the board members?
He's self muted.
Mr. Casados, are you on?
You might have to mute yourself, Tony.
I think I muted him.
Mr. Danette Claw, are you on?
You're here.
Mr. Perez. Mr. Reyes. Here.
You need to probably figure out how to get them
So
unmuted.
we only have three.
They're present. We'll just get them unmuted. And while Sammy's presenting.
If it says to mute, go to mute. It's just to unmute.
Do you have them unmuted yet, Buck?
There doesn't look like unmute them. Looks like they have to unmute themselves. Cause I don't have them muted. Excuse no. Keep muted. No. Is it where you guys can mute yourselves, Tony, Michael, and Milford? Click the little mic button on your phone and just say something.
Can the other board members check in? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I don't have them muted.
You want me to see if I can get them on my phone?
Yeah, this is Victor. Can you hear us on the Zoom or? No, are you muted on your side? Should you try logging out and logging back in? Let me ask them.
Yeah, let's try that.
Yeah, can you try logging out and then logging back into the Zoom?
Michael, Milford, and Tony, if you guys can
Yeah, try
maybe
getting back
hang up and then recall and then re-access the meeting, please. Not sure what's going on. So Tony's gone. Michael looks like he's gone. Milford's still on here, it says.
Is he gonna hang up and try again?
So you just gonna try it.
Just try it over again.
Who's this that just called in?
Michael Pettis.
Michael Pettis. Wait, say it again, Michael.
Yes, I'm here.
Gotcha.
Not working.
Is that Tony?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you, boss.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I don't know anything. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Morgan's gonna be calling in.
She's getting online. She was having problems with her router.
Back to the very beginning of start all over again.
Milford is on here, but he's somehow still muted. I don't know how to unmute him.
So I'm gonna text him. Did Morgan get on?
I haven't seen Morgan yet.
She was getting on.
Oh, there's Morgan right there.
So I'll text Milford to tell her to hang up and try it.
Okay.
My computer doesn't have a.
Your computer? No. This one has it. Yeah.
We're holding up just a second, waiting for one more board member.
I'm here.
Thanks, Morgan. So let the record reflect, Mr. Casados and Mr. Pettis are both online as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Denetclaw, still no connection there?
He says he's on, but for some reason it says he's muted, and I'm not sure if he.
Also on.
I sent him a text and asked him to hang up and call back in. So
Move forward or give him another minute?
I think go ahead and move forward.
Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and move on then. Jamie, we have established.
I think maybe because we're here, we can just go ahead and do roll call again.
Okay.
Verify that.
Okay, definitely. Okay, we'll do roll call once again. Mrs. Switzer McGinley.
Did we lose her?
Mrs. Switzer McGinley, are you there? Mr. Tafoya? Here. Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Casados?
Yes.
Mr. Denetclaw, Mr. Pettis,
Yes.
Mr. Reyes.
Here.
Okay. We've still established a quorum. Okay. Okay, so the third item on the agenda is to discuss and act approval of the agenda for the January 30th, 2025 special board meeting.
I move approval of the agenda.
With a motion by Mr. Reyes.
Second.
Second, Mr. Coniff.
Second.
Mr. Coniff beat you to it, Mr. Casados. Any discussion on that at all? Okay, we'll do a roll call on it. Mrs. Switzer McGinley? Mr. Tafoya?
Yes.
Mr. Coniff?
Yes.
Mr. Casados?
Yes.
Mr. Denetclaw? Mr. Pettis?
Yes.
Mr. Reyes?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Number 4, consideration, discuss, act, adoption of emergency rule for EIA, NMAC 21.30.4. And we will take public comment on this agenda item. Who's going to present this item for us?
Mr. Chair, Dr. Hollick will be presenting this item. Do you need this one, or you got one to do?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. The purpose of this meeting is for me to present to the board an emergency rule to amend 21.30.4 New Mexico Administrative Code in order to contain, control, and help with the eradication of equine infectious anemia, also known as EIA. This disease has caused an imminent peril to public welfare by placing the equine population of New Mexico at undue risk of exposure to an untreatable and terminal illness. All equine species are susceptible to this viral disease, and while it is currently contained to the racing industry, the risk of exposure exists for it to affect equids in the ranching industry, equine therapy industry, and even protected equine species in zoologic and captive settings. Therefore, I request that the board make a finding that based on the information presented, that the time required to complete the normal rulemaking procedures would cause an imminent peril to public welfare.
Does anyone on the board have further questions or clarification from Dr. Hollick?
Will you be walking through the changes with us?
Yes.
Great.
Yes,
That's
sir.
all true. I'll take my questions for that.
Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, we are up against making the determination as to the emergency factor of this.
Yes, sir.
What's the pleasure of the board on that?
Mr. Chairman, this is Tony. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, am I to understand that we need to make a decision based upon the quick acting upon this change? Otherwise, it's going to take a long time. Is that what I heard?
Yes, it is, Tony. It's the first portion is to determine if it's an emergency.
Okay, so do we have to act on that?
I think the board needs to make the determination if they believe it is an emergency.
Do you go through a roll call on that, Mr. Chairman, or how do you do it?
Yes, sir. I guess we'd have to have a motion on that.
I move we accept the recommendation of the state veterinarian to act on this emergency item.
Do you currently have a motion?
We do have a motion from Mr. Reyes. That comes in the form of a motion.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, motion, Mr. Reyes. Who was the second?
Morgan Switzer McGinley.
Morgan? Okay. Ms. Switzer McGinley. Okay, any further discussion on this? Can you state the motion one more time, Mr. Rose?
I move we accept the recommendation of the state veterinarian and consider this emergency rulemaking item.
Okay, we have the motion and the second. Any other discussion? We'll go through and do the roll call if not. Okay. Mr. Tafoya?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Casado?
Yes.
Mr. Denetclaw? Mr. Pettis?
Yes.
The motion carries. Then the board has determined it is of an emergency nature.
I proffer to the board an emergency rule amendment that involves the testing, disposition, and compliance of equine infectious anemia of horses in 21.30.4 NMAC, which falls under the agriculture and ranching, animals, and animal industry general provisions. The board has legal authority to make an emergency rule amendment pursuant to Livestock Code 77-2-7, NMSA 1978, and 77-3-13, NMSA 1978. The rule changes I propose that, if adopted, would have an immediate response to the public welfare concerns involving EIA in the state of New Mexico. And the rule changes are as follows. You want me to go line by line?
Go through
Okay.
the rule.
So beginning with the definitions, there are definitions that will remain in place, but we've added the definition for cohort, which are equids that are considered to be exposed or high risk due to epidemiological link to a positive animal. We defined regulatory sample, meaning blood sample collected for confirmatory testing. And we defined surveillance sample, meaning blood sample collected for routine testing. So those are new definitions that would be added in to the previous NMAC. The next section defines equine infectious anemia as an infectious disease of equines caused by a lentivirus, equine infectious anemia virus, EIAV. The infection is characterized by three distinct forms: acute, chronic, both associated with the clinical signs of disease, and inapparent. Part B, official test, the agrogel immunodiffusion, or AGID test, also known as the Coggins test, the competitive enzyme-linked immunoabsorbent assay, also known as ELISA test, another United States Department of Agriculture or USDA licensed test approved by the New Mexico Livestock Board. These are official tests for equine infectious anemia, or EIA, in all equine species. Authorization to conduct the test. Only USDA-approved laboratories are allowed to run the AGID and ELISA or other USDA licensed tests. Equine blood samples collected for the official EIA test shall be collected by a state or federal animal health official or an accredited veterinarian who is licensed in the state in which the animal being tested is located. EIA infected animals. Any equid testing positive for EIA on surveillance sampling will be placed on a hold order at its current location, isolated from other equids by at least 200 yards, until confirmatory testing is completed at the USDA National Veterinary Services Laboratory, NVSL. Cohorts of the EIA positive equid or equids will also be subject to the hold order subject to the conditions listed in section E6. If an EIA positive equid is located on a premises other than that of the owner at the time of the quarantine, the Office of the State Veterinarian may authorize movement of the EIA positive equid to the owner's premises or a premises approved for isolation by the NMLB. The movement shall occur under the direct supervision of the NMLB, and the trailer shall be sealed by a livestock inspector prior to leaving the origin. Seals shall be broken only by a livestock inspector at the destination. If NVSL determines the sample is negative based on AGID, the hold order will be released. If NVSL confirms the sample is positive based on AGID, the hold order will be upgraded to a quarantine within 24 hours of receipt of confirmation. Regulatory testing of the EIA positive equid and its cohorts will be performed by a state or federal regulatory veterinarian within 5 days of NVSL confirmation of the surveillance sample. Disposition of confirmed EIA horses. EIA positive equids must be euthanized and buried or incinerated in accordance with the local ordinance within 5 days of NVSL confirmation of the regulatory sample, or exported out of New Mexico within 30 days if the owner is able to obtain permission from the receiving state or country and USDA. Any EIA positive equid that cannot be euthanized within 5 days of NVSL confirmation, or any EIA positive equid destined for export, shall be branded either freeze or hot iron with an 85A on the left neck or left shoulder in accordance with the USDA EIA Uniform Methods and Rules within 5 days of NVSL confirmation. Euthanasia or export shall occur within 30 days of NVSL confirmation. The owner is responsible for the cost of export or euthanasia and disposal of the EIA positive equid or equids, and shall not be indemnified by the state for any loss caused by the destruction or loss of value of the equid or equids. The veterinarian performing the euthanasia shall provide a written affidavit to the office of the state veterinarian within 72 hours of performing the euthanasia. Exposed or high-risk equids. Exposed or high-risk equids are those determined to have an epidemiological link to the positive animal either by proximity, common ownership, or other factors. An exposed or high-risk equid may or may not be located on the same premises as an EIA positive equid. Equids considered to be exposed or high risk may be tested by an accredited veterinarian at the owner's expense or by a state or federal regulatory veterinarian. Equids tested by an accredited veterinarian may be subject to a retest by a state or federal regulatory veterinarian at any time. Exposed or high-risk equids shall be placed under a hold order until they have tested negative to EIA at least 60 days after the last known exposure. Movement of exposed or high-risk equids may be allowed prior to the 60-day test if they have a negative EIA test performed by an accredited veterinarian prior to movement and with the approval of the Office of the State Veterinarian. Request for movement approval is required at least 48 hours prior to it occurring and shall include the following information: registered name of equid, all official identification of equid, including microchip or tattoo, name of owner, name of trainer, destination, purpose of movement, and length of stay. These equids shall be made available for their 60-day test, regardless of their location. Compliance. Livestock inspectors who are certified peace officers in accordance with the Section 30-18-14 NMSA 1978 shall enforce the provisions of Chapter 30, Article 18 NMSA 1978 and other criminal laws relating to livestock. Livestock inspectors may arrest persons found in the act or whom they have probable cause to believe are guilty of driving, holding, or slaughtering stolen livestock. Any persons who violate the provisions of these rules may be subject to the criminal and civil penalties pursuant to Sections 72-2-9, 72-2-22 NMSA 1978. Penalties for misdemeanor crimes can include imprisonment of less than 1 year or fines up to $1,000 or both. Penalties for petty misdemeanors include imprisonment not to exceed 6 months or fines up to $500 or both. Furthermore, any person who violates a rule adopted under the power granted to the board, unless the penalty has been fixed by law, is guilty of a misdemeanor and upon conviction shall be sentenced in accordance with the provisions of Section 31-19-1 NMSA 1978. That concludes the changes.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Tony.
I'm trying to follow the summation that is being presented. Am I to understand that when the disease has been detected, who does the initial testing to determine whether or not there is a defined disease? Does the horse have to be taken to a certain place, or is it done on site? I didn't understand that.
Mr. Chair and members of the board, the initial test can be done by an accredited veterinarian, and often that is the case, that a surveillance sample collected from the horse by the accredited veterinarian may be the first indication that the horse is infected. We follow up then, either our office or the USDA office will follow up with regulatory confirmation. And the veterinarian who does that confirmation can go to the horse, and that is typically what is done, because that horse is held in isolation where it is located unless it needs to be moved to a safe location away from other horses.
Okay, so any veterinarian that's qualified can make the initial, can make the initial decision that there is in fact an infection. Is that correct? And then does someone else have to, I guess, follow through and agree to it, or what? Like the state vet, or what?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, yes, sir. The initial test that is done is usually the ELISA test, and it is much more sensitive, and that is why it is used for the surveillance sample. But the confirmation is done with an AGID, and then the decision is made. The hold order is placed based on the positive surveillance sample, but the decision to quarantine and make a determination of the outcome for that particular horse comes after the confirmation sample.
Okay, and so as a follow-up question, maybe I'm just trying to take over the meeting, but not necessarily. I want to make sure that I understand what's going on. Once confirmation is made that there is in fact a definite disease present, ultimately the horse will be euthanized. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair and members of the board, oftentimes that is the choice that the owner makes, is euthanasia. The disease itself is a permanent disease. There is no treatment for it. It is not reversible, and that animal continues to have virus in its bloodstream that is then creating a risk for any other equine species around it based on natural transmission.
So why does the owner have to make the decision as to whether the horse is euthanized or not? What if he refuses to euthanize it?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, based on the USDA uniform methods and rules, there are two options presented to the owner, and that is typically euthanasia or lifetime quarantine. We, based on our conversations with other horse owners and industry representatives in New Mexico, lifetime quarantine is something that our industry, I think, does not want to entertain because of the risk of exposure to other horses in the state. So we do allow an option for them to remove those horses from the state, because there are other states that will allow lifetime quarantine. Some of them have very strict requirements for that, including an insect-proof enclosure, but that horse has to be isolated away from other horses for the rest of its life.
Yeah, but who bears the cost of doing that? The owner?
Yes, sir.
You're not going to get very many owners to agree to have that horse situated elsewhere, and he will have to bear the cost of it forever and a day. That's not going to happen.
Tough shit.
But it's a choice, Mr. Casados. They either have the choice of doing that or euthanizing the horse.
Can the owner personally euthanize the horse, or do you have to have a trained physician, a trained vet to do it? Can I just take my horse to the backyard and put a bullet hole in his head and bury him? Is that allowable?
So, Mr. Chair and members of the board, the method of euthanasia and who performs that is the choice of the owner, because they are responsible for that animal, and it's it does not necessarily have to be performed by a veterinarian. That is at the discretion of the owner. We do have to have documentation and proof that the horse was euthanized. So if the owner chooses to euthanize the horse themselves, we would need to have a livestock inspector or a representative of the Office of the State Veterinarian present to confirm the euthanasia and disposal of that horse.
It could be a livestock inspector, in other words.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I understand.
So I had a couple of questions, I think. So if I have a horse that initially tests positive, and I tried to keep up with you as you read it, but then do I, as a horse owner, have the ability to have the second test drawn, or is that just automatic under letter D, number 3?
So, Mr. Chairman, the process when a surveillance sample tests positive, there is a risk of a false positive. That surveillance sample, which is performed by an approved lab, has to be forwarded on to NBSL for confirmation. That is the first step. And if NBSL determines that the test is negative by other means, so the AGID test, if they determine it is negative, and then they can deem the horse as negative, and that's the end of the process. And that is at no additional charge or effort to the owner. That all happens with the very first sample. In some cases where, for example, we had an incident where a horse had been recently vaccinated and the immune system was stimulated. It was positive on the ELISA test, which is the more sensitive test, and negative on the AGID. And based on the recommendations of NVSL, that horse was retested by a regulatory official, so someone such as myself or a USDA veterinarian, at our expense, to confirm whether or not that horse was truly positive or negative. In that case, the horse was negative because the immune system had caused a cross reaction with the surveillance test. And that's why we have the additional testing in place. In the event that a surveillance sample sent to NVSL is positive on all of those tests, then a regulatory official will go out and collect a second sample. So at no expense to the owner, that sample is collected and sent straight to NVSL. So one, that we know it was collected from that horse, that the sample was handled properly and there was no risk of any contamination or issues with how the sample was handled, that it was sent directly to NVSL for confirmation. If that sample comes back positive again, then the horse is confirmed as a positive EIA horse.
Got it.
Mr. Chairman, Tony again, I have one more question.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Okay, so what we are being asked to do is to put in, I'm assuming, a different procedure that is different from what we are currently utilizing as part of the rule now. What are we doing in order to do we have to change the rule that is in place now? Let me put it that way. And what is the main emphasis that we're putting in place to make this change? Are we going to get there in a minute?
So, Mr. Chairman and members, Mr. Casados, so the challenge is that we currently have no rules in New Mexico to address an EIA positive horse. The only
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, you're welcome.
So my next question is under the letter E, disposition, number 4. What was the thought process in some circumstances that would prevent the horse from being euthanized within 5 days?
So, Mr. Chairman, the feasibility and logistics of getting a veterinarian, if the owner chooses to have a veterinarian euthanize the horse, sometimes it takes time to get a veterinarian on site because we don't want to move the horse, obviously, from the location. So you have to find a veterinarian who is willing and able to come out to the location. That is a deviation from the uniform methods and rules issued by USDA. They do want that horse euthanized within 24 hours. We felt by trying to put that language in our rules, it would be really difficult to uphold. And so we allowed 5 days to give a more reasonable timeline. And that certainly can be negotiated. For us, the thought process is, if you get that test confirmation on a Friday afternoon, and inevitably Monday is a holiday or something, somebody's out of town, whatever the case may be, trying to give a 5-day window to arrange the euthanasia and the proper disposal of that horse as well. But we felt that was appropriate.
My last question.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
am I recognized?
Yes, go ahead.
What is it allowable for the owner or whomever his appointee is to transport the horse to a veterinary's location instead of the veterinarian? Maybe the veterinarian cannot make it to the actual place, but is it allowable for the owner to transport that horse himself to get tested?
So, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Casados, there is nothing that prohibits the horse from going to the veterinarian to have the euthanasia performed. I can tell you that many veterinarians are reluctant to have those horses brought on to their clinic location because of the risk that it puts, the other horses, other equine species could be put at risk with that movement. However,
that's my point.
Yeah, so we certainly can allow for that with good communication and planning, but we would need to discuss that ahead of time.
Okay.
Then my last question falls under letter F, the exposed. Is there a definition of exposed, or am I missing it? And if it's not here, what is it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So exposed, it would fall under the cohort definition, and we could probably, if we wanted to, either add that exposed definition in or change that section F title to cohorts. We could do that for consistency's sake.
My concern was just to try to keep that from being vague. I mean, I could look at exposed a lot of different ways, but I need to know what exposed is from a veterinarian standpoint in how this disease is transmitted. I think is how you would really define that. Is that fair to say?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we can certainly define that better. This is strictly a bloodborne disease. And so this is not as highly contagious as some of the other, like respiratory diseases that we've dealt with. Equine herpes virus, for example, is much more contagious. This is infectious, but it requires a blood transmission for that virus to be transmitted from one horse to another.
So I guess where I'm going with that is I have a small place with just a line of stalls, and the horses that are right next to this horse, I guess you would easily consider them exposed. But if I have a 200-acre farm and this horse is in a paddock, but the rest of them are out in the pasture, would those horses be considered exposed? That's where I was trying to draw the line of what is exposed.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's a good point. 200 yards distance minimum is what is outlined in the USDA Uniform Methods and Rules. And so we could certainly add a reference to that Uniform Methods and Rules document in here where those details of how horses can be exposed are outlined in that document.
And I see the 200 yards is mentioned under letter D, but it still doesn't really give us a definition of exposed. So that, just to try to prevent that from being vague in the future, that may be a consideration. But any other questions of the board?
So could we just add an F5 to say exposed and then adopt the USDA definition? Would that work?
Does that create issues with where we're at today?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, we could also consider that for a permanent rule. This is only a temporary rule, so I think that would also be an opportunity to clarify that unless the board thinks it's absolutely necessary for this emergency rule.
Can you just issue a memo and just maybe saying something to that effect, or a letter to the industry?
I think it would be better to address it in the. So.
Mr. Chairman, this is Tony. One last question for sure. Am I being recognized?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, so my question is, how common is that disease today compared to before? In other words, are we seeing an increase in cases overall?
Mr. Chair, and members of the board, this disease was, there were very few cases of this disease reported historically, but in 2024, we placed 17 quarantines, 13 of which were for positive horses. And some of those quarantines, there were multiple horses involved in some of those quarantines. That was only within the borders of New Mexico. The disease itself, beyond our borders, has been fairly significant in the last year.
Okay.
Anybody else from the board have questions of Dr. Hollick?
Have other states adopted EIA specific rules?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Reyes, yes. Actually, many states have rules in place. And for example, I looked at rules from Arizona, Texas, Georgia, and I believe Colorado. I used those rules as a guideline to draft this set of rules. And as Chris pointed out, this is a temporary set of rules that would at least allow us the ability to have a uniform response to these kinds of cases. We've never had any sort of structure in place with this before.
And remind me, an emergency rule lasts, how many months does that last for? What's the length?
Mr. Chair, Member Reyes, the emergency rule would be in place for 180 days, but any rule that needs to be in place for more than 90 would have to go through the proper rule hearing procedure, which I would encourage that be considered so that we can have a permanent rule in place and certainly give the opportunity for comment and additional language to clarify some of the points like what was made earlier today.
So we'll meet again within 90 days to consider a permanent rule after public comment will be open to comment, people to submit written comments, etc. Is that how that works?
180 days.
How do we look at Mexico as far as what they might or might not have come across the border? Have we had some of that, or?
Mr. Chair and Member Conniff, yeah, so there have been reports of illegal movement of horses from Mexico, and not just horses, but also biological products that may have introduced the infection um, as a result of that. So, our ability to put something like this in place, I think, will help strengthen our response to that.
Anybody else on the board with questions? Anybody online, the board members online have questions?
No.
I have one.
Okay, go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, am I recognized?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
What does our person there in charge there, what do they recommend we do? What are we going to be very similar to their other states that have joined us?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, yes, this would help bring New Mexico in line with other states. The only difference between the rules that I've proposed and other states is the absence of offering lifetime quarantine. And the justification for that, again, it is difficult to keep those horses in true confinement where they do not have any risk of natural transmission through biting flies. The other concern is if a quarantine over years, over time, if that quarantine becomes neglected or forgotten, which with changeover in staffing and it can create a situation where that horse would be a greater risk. And there was a very good example of that in Montana years ago, where a horse was put into permanent lifetime quarantine, and that quarantine fell through the cracks. And unfortunately, that horse was commingled with its herd, and 10 years later, several horses in the herd were positive.
Hmm.
And I don't want to put all
Yeah,
our horses at risk of that here in New Mexico.
Yes, I don't think we need to do that. I think we're putting a lot of horses, a lot of our residents in New Mexico at risk by leaving the horses alive. If they've got an illness that's going to be terminal that you cannot cure, why would you want to put the horse in quarantine when he could get, like you say, slip through the cracks and infect other horses?
Agreed.
It's probably because some people love their horses more than they do their kids.
Well, sometimes common sense needs to take over.
I agree.
Any other questions from the board members?
We'll go to public comment next.
Yeah, we'll move to public comment if there's not. Anybody else from the board? Okay, are you able to help us out with public comment? I think what we'll do is we'll open the public comment, and I think we'll go about 2 minutes per person. Anybody that would like to make public comment, I want to stress that we will only hear public comment as it relates to this rule change. We will not entertain public comment on any other topic. Bobby, you want to help us out with that? How do we do that? Are they going to raise their hand, or do we know who it is that wants to make a comment? I know I heard one earlier for sure.
Raise your hand and help you identify.
Yeah, so if you're online and you wish to make public comment, if you could click the raise your hand button.
And then after you do that, I'm unable to unmute you, so I'll just send you a little request for you to unmute yourself, and then you should unmute yourself. But we got first one is Vanessa.
So you have somebody?
Yeah, Vanessa is up first. Look, she's unmuted. I think she's ready.
Just waiting for permission.
Okay, if you could just state your name and then begin, please.
Okay, my name is Vanessa Alexander. I'm an investigative researcher, member of the horse racing community. I just wanted to say bravo I know I have I've caused you guys a lot of trouble this year. I can't really say I'm sorry. This is a major issue, and it had to be addressed. Just a comment about the kind of the common sense of letting people keep these horses alive. I hate to break it to you, but the vast majority of these cases, as far as out of Frontera Park and the racing aspect, these are people that match race. They could not care less about these horses. They are used up. Most of them die brutal deaths on the match tracks, and they will continue to run them until the horses drop dead. There were dozens of cases just in one spot in Texas last year and the year before at a match racing facility. This is a broken record. It's just over and over and over. So I am really pleased to see the board taking some effort. I do think that mandatory euthanasia needs to be on the table, and it is for the reasons that I've just stated. It doesn't matter if you brand them; they're still going to be match racing these horses, and they're still going to be exposing and infecting others. And that kind of brings me around to the other issue that I needed to bring up that I hope this board is aware of, and why I'm really happy with these changes that you're making is because you had people that had horses that were under hold orders at a Frontera Park, especially, that were bringing horses to Albuquerque Downs and they were racing them. And some of these horses weren't just exposed; they were positives. And there were other positives at Downs at Albuquerque that may be related to this. Obviously, there were a lot of positives at the Downs of Albuquerque that were not, which is another separate, dumpster fire. But I do feel that it is very important for this board to be aware, okay, that the New Mexico Racing Commission did in fact, okay, conceal the positive cases. And I see you, Mr. Brown. I see you rolling your eyes, but listen, this is on the record. Okay, on October 8th, the Mr.
You've been
Trejo.
to 2 minutes. I do appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I've got a question for you, Mr. President.
It's my
Is that Mr. Pettis?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Are these horses that are on the racetrack, how often are they tested? When they are at the racetrack, how often do they get tested?
So, Mr. Chair, members of the board, the normal requirement is annual testing. Given the circumstances that we faced in 2024, the New Mexico Racing Commission implemented a 30-day testing rule, and they have kept that in place with our support.
So they're tested every 30 days?
Yes, sir, and that will continue at least temporarily until we feel that it is safe in the Racing Commission, until they feel that it is safe to lift that requirement.
Yes, I agree.
Who do we have next for public comment?
So if they're on the phone, they may not be able to raise their hands. We may have to just unmute. I know Nancy stated she wanted to make
Let's
comments.
move to Nancy if you have her available.
I don't see her name on here. She might have hung up and rejoined. So Nancy, if you're on here, you can go and start your public comments.
Are you there, Nancy? Miss Henry, are you there?
Let's see. Yeah. There's two callers that are unmuted, but they're not saying anything.
Can you unmute each one individually?
It only lets me send an unmute request. So I can send out mute requests to everyone. He's not muted.
Mrs. Henry, are you on there? Can you hear us?
Oh, oops. That was the wrong person. Mr. Brown.
Unmuted.
You asked me to unmute. Can I speak again?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. But he had his hand raised, but he's not muted.
Yeah. Yeah, this is Mark Brown.
And Mark Brown's ready.
I think so.
Okay, Mr. Brown, go ahead.
Yes, that, I'm all in support of this rule change in that because I was one of the victims that happened to have a horse come down with this that we had to euthanize, and it was a very valuable filly. And, and it basically put my farm at risk with the other horses I had in the stable on that. But something has to be done so that these horses cannot be moved around in that. And your state veterinarian, her and her crew in that done a wonderful job of working with us to get a solution in that. But I also know that she's been having a hard time tracking these other horses that are moving around. People aren't honoring the quarantine in that. And so the problem is some of the people here, and I think you got to put the teeth into it and make sure that we don't put everything else in risk in the industry in that. And your people are very, very capable. She's done a great job, but it's something that we've got to do. And I didn't, I breed and raised my own horses. The horse I put down, I was there when she was born. I was there when we had to put her down. It's not easy, but I couldn't risk the rest of my animals in that either. And so, and I didn't want any other families or any other people to go through it. So I think it's very important that you pass this rule and make it uh, mandatory, make it a regular statutory deal when you have the time to fix it as a permanent rule. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Where are we at now?
Anyone else need public comments?
Anybody else that would like to make public comment? Raise your hand.
Cool. We're still here. Can you guys hear us still? Yeah, we're still good. All right. The power button side is rough. I'm sorry. All right. That looks like we're good on public comments. Oh, that's all right.
Is there anybody else that has their hand raised on that?
I'm not seeing.
Are you able to identify anybody on there at all?
I'm not seeing Miss Henry now. I see two unknown callers, caller 4 and caller 11, but
Are they unmuted?
yeah, they are not muted, so they should be able to make comments if they can.
So anybody that's online should be able to speak as of right now and we would hear them?
Yeah, everyone that's called in for sure.
Anybody else that's online for public comment, could you say something?
Someone raise their hand. I sent an unmute request. Yeah, that's if to join through the link. No one looks like it's
I don't want to miss anybody that's online. Speak up if you have the desire to make public comment.
Or raise your hand again.
No one else?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, so we have heard Dr. Hollick. We've discussed it. What's the pleasure of the board? Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we make the changes to New Mexico Administrative Code, Title 21, Chapter 20, Part 4, Section 7, 11, 12, and 13 as an emergency rule to be effective February 11th, 2025.
Okay, we have the motion. Did you have some input, Mr. Match?
I think just to clarify the motion, it should just be noted that it's a temporary emergency rule amendment. It would only be issued pursuant to state rule and the findings made here today. So I think that would be important if we wish to.
So
I would like to make a motion. I would like to make a motion to issue a temporary emergency rule amendment to 21.30.4 NMAC as outlined by Dr. Hollick that will be issued pursuant to state rule and after the findings made here today are posted, and the temporary order will be 180 days.
I withdraw my motion. And I'll second that motion.
Okay. So we have a motion by Mr. Tafoya, second by Mr. Reyes. Any further discussion on this from the board members? One last opportunity for anybody that's online, anybody else that wants to make public comment, I'll hear it right now. Okay, let's go through the roll call vote then. Mrs. Switzer McGinley,
Yes.
Mr. Conniff,
Yes.
Mr. Casados,
Yes.
Mr. Denetclaw,
Yes.
Mr. Pettis,
Yes.
and motion carries.
I vote yes. Second, but
Yeah, you made your service. Okay. So the last agenda item is any other board concerns? Anybody on the board have any concerns?
Mr. Chair, if I would just make the announcement as a reminder, our next board meeting will be March 26th in Las Cruces. We are making arrangements for a room, and I will be supplying the board members with that information just as soon as we have it all confirmed. We're looking at,
Belinda,
yes,
excuse me, Mark, when was the date for the next board meeting?
Board Member Casados, it is March 26th,
Okay,
and it will be in Las Cruces. Right now, we're tentatively looking at a hotel that board members can stay in that need to travel, and they have a meeting room. So that information will be conveyed to you.
okay. Thank you.
Any other concerns on the board? If not, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
so moved.
Second.
Motion, Mr. Reyes, second, Mr. Conniff. We'll do the roll call. Mrs. Switzer McGinley,
Yes.
Mr. Tafoya,
Yes.
Mr. Casados,
Yes.
Mr. Denetclaw,
Oh, yes.
and Mr. Pettis.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Meeting's adjourned.